Hello everyone, I'm Freaky and welcome to the video. Okay, I know for a fact that the thumbnail of this video has raised a few eyebrows when it comes to the Godzilla fanbase, and some of the Godzilla fanbase might think, oh, I'm going to be shitting on Godzilla, which I'm not, and some Godzilla fans might say, oh, I'm just a Kong fanboy, thus is trying to get one up on Godzilla and the fanbase, which again, isn't the case. Okay, tell you what, to those of you who haven't seen my video, dear poisonous Godzilla fanboys, stop, just stop. If you guys haven't seen that video, please go and check out that video. That video will explain that I actually respect Godzilla, and then as soon as you've done that, come back, watch me talk about or whatever I'm going to talk about in this video. And again, I'm not here to bash Godzilla, I'm not here to bash the monsterverse, I'm not here to bash the fanbase, I'm just here to talk, okay? If I wanted to trash talk the Godzilla fanbase, then I would have done so in the beginning of this video. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's continue. Now, when it comes to Godzilla in the monsterverse, we've only ever had two movies where he's the main monster, 2014 and King of the Monsters. Now, before anybody says anything like, oh, but what about Godzilla vs. Kong 2021? Hold up, I'll get to that in a second. In fact, that movie, Godzilla vs. Kong 2021, is one of the reasons why I made this video. Anyways, when it comes to Godzilla, I actually want him to do well in his movies. And not just in his movies, but in other movies too, and series. Like, if he was to do a crossover with some other characters in their movies or his own movies, I want Godzilla to be given the respect he deserves. Yeah, sure, I might be a Kong fan, but that doesn't mean I'm going to knock down Godzilla and say, ha ha ha, Kong is better. No. I want Godzilla to get the respect he deserves. And you know what? I want the monsterverse to be successful, so we can get other monsters from other movies and series. And we've got to be really careful on how we use Godzilla in movies, especially in the West. I mean, come on, the Godzilla fanbase is huge. And listen, I'm not saying that we should bend the knee and we should give the Godzilla fanbase everything they want, or oh, we should be afraid of the Godzilla fanbase because of what they could do. No. What I'm trying to say is, when it comes to the monsterverse, the concentration of the movies, in the recent movies, in Godzilla vs. Kong, and I've been hearing rumours that Godzilla is barely in the new monsterverse movie. I think it's called Godzilla X Kong. I've been hearing rumours that Godzilla is barely in it, and you know what, that's a problem, because when it comes to Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla X Kong, Godzilla should equally get screen time, just as much as Kong. I mean, come on, it's Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla X Kong, and he's barely in the movies. I mean, yeah, he's in the movies, but he's almost like a side character in Godzilla vs. Kong. And again, from what I've been hearing from the rumours of the new Monsterverse movies, Godzilla X Kong, again, he's barely in the movie, from what I've been told. And the concentration was always on Kong when it comes to Godzilla vs. Kong. In Godzilla vs. Kong, he was always looking for King Ghidorah, and then he would cross paths with Kong, and then we continue Kong's journey, and Kong would cross with Godzilla again, and it was Kong who finished off Mecha Godzilla. I mean, even though I do like the movie, there were some problems with it. I did make a review or a rant about the movie, so if you want to go and check out that video, please do. Anyways, when it came to Godzilla vs. Kong, we had two teams, Team Kong and Team Godzilla, and we would usually see Team Kong with Kong and Team Godzilla with no Godzilla, and they're just like walking around this place trying to figure out what the heck's going on with Godzilla, and they find out there's a Mecha Godzilla with King Ghidorah's conscience in it. I just think that Godzilla should have gotten more screen time. Godzilla vs. Kong feels like a Kong movie more than anything. I mean, Godzilla is just destroying a city, fighting Kong, fighting Mecha Godzilla, and we see it from a freaking distance, and then it's Kong and Godzilla versus Mecha Godzilla. I mean, come on, Mecha Godzilla is Godzilla's enemy, and he's taken out by freaking Kong, which, don't get me wrong, I thought was cool. And again, from what I've been hearing that it's the same with the new movie, Godzilla X Kong. And you know what, if this is true, then the writers of the Monsterverse need to step up their game when it comes to Godzilla. But that's also the problem too, because when it comes to King Kong or just Kong, you can easily write Kong a good story. Because when it comes to the Kong movies, Kong has a lot of character going for him. He has character, he has a story, he has a backstory, and he shows all the emotions of what humans show. Okay, I mean, not literally, but Kong shows similarities when it comes to human emotions, so we can understand him a little bit more. And the relationship he has with the humans, especially with that little girl, and you can see how he longs to be with his own kind, and you also fear if Kong is going to be okay in his fights. You always fear for Kong's life if he's going to be okay. And that's not to say that you don't feel the same way with Godzilla, like, oh, is Godzilla going to be okay? And also, not to mention, Kong also has loads of potential, like, he has the potential of getting electric powers, and he has potential of bringing out more good movies. I mean, look at the original black and white King Kong movie, and look at all the other movies that King Kong has been in. When it comes to those movies, you just felt sorry for him. Even more so when it comes to Godzilla. Because when it comes to Godzilla, I mean, come on, he's the freaking king of the monsters. He's durable, unbeatable, and he fires the most coolest beam in fictional history. Because when it comes to Godzilla, we want to see Godzilla kick some ass. We want Godzilla to beat all these other monsters that steps up to him and tries to take his crown. And also, not to mention, in the monsterverse, it's been shown that Godzilla has some history with the Atlanteans, which is interesting. But if you guys had to twist my arm, I think Kong has the more interesting stories and has the most potential. But that's not to say that Godzilla doesn't have any. It's just that Godzilla is very hard to write when it comes to a story. Like, okay, let's talk about the original Godzilla movies. Like, let's have a look at the very first Godzilla movie. When it comes to the first Godzilla movie, the black and white one, back in the 50s, people were more into environmental stuff and nuclear threats, and this in turn gave rise to the giant monster, like the giant spider, the ants from they, etc, etc. But the most famous monster that came from this was Godzilla. And when it comes to Godzilla, Godzilla was a metaphor for the nukes that destroyed Japan in World War II. And when it comes to Godzilla in the first black and white film, instead of being like an old goofy movie about some guy being in a costume, the movie takes itself very, very seriously. Okay, maybe there's a little bit of silliness in it. Well, I mean, come on, it's a freaking fire-breathing dinosaur, for crying out loud. Anyways, when it comes to Godzilla in this movie, there was nothing but absolute destruction when it comes to this movie on what Godzilla did. Destroying buildings, destroying lives, firing his atomic breath, and leaving destruction behind him wherever he goes. And it's up to the humans to destroy Godzilla, which they did by using the oxygen destroyer, which they did use that weapon against Godzilla in the monsterverse. So when it comes to the good things about this movie is that the humans have to try and defeat Godzilla. Godzilla is leaving loads of destruction in his path, and Godzilla is one of the first giant monsters to do what he did. Yeah, sure, there was like other monsters before him that did this sort of thing, but Godzilla did it better. And yeah, I know sometimes it can be a bit silly, a giant monster that's indestructible and it's firing atomic blasts and the oxygen destroyer, but it was the destruction and how invincible Godzilla was, and how the humans had to deal with him. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Now, when it comes to the next one, Godzilla Rides Again, it's basically the same like the last one, but a major difference. It was two giant monsters fighting against each other, Anguirus versus Godzilla. This was one of the first movies to have two giant monsters fighting each other, and again, they gotta try and figure out a way to beat Godzilla again. And when it came to the third Godzilla movie, we had the king himself, King Kong, facing off against Godzilla. Now, King Kong was a very, very popular monster, and for King Kong to go up against Godzilla, you know for a fact that's gonna get people all excited. So, one famous monster versus another famous monster, and it was in colour. So, the third movie gave us a famous monster, King Kong versus Godzilla, and it was in colour. And in the fourth movie, we had Mothra, a good monster, facing off against Godzilla, because hey, a good monster. The fifth movie had King Ghidorah, Godzilla's arch rival, including a team up with Rodan, and Mothra versus King Ghidorah. And in the sixth movie, we have Godzilla and Rodan going to space. Okay, you guys basically what I'm trying to say. Nearly every single one of these Godzilla films had something special and unique when it came to Godzilla facing off against another monster or fighting humans. And there's freaking lots of them. Godzilla facing off against Space Godzilla, Godzilla facing off against a hybrid plant, human Godzilla, Godzilla fighting off against Mecha Godzilla, Godzilla versus the original Godzilla in a Mecha Godzilla. There's Shin Godzilla. There was a movie about Godzilla facing off against every single monster that he went up against. And of course, we have Godzilla versus Destroyer! Destroyer, the monster that killed Godzilla. And of course, we have that 1998 Godzilla, which was rebranded as Zilla. And even though the 1998 Godzilla movie was crap, Godzilla the animated series was fan-freaking-tastic. There was also Godzilla Planet of the Monsters, Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle, Godzilla the Planet Eater. All these were animated anyways. What I'm trying to say is, when it comes to Godzilla, throughout his movies, they've always given us something new. Like, we know the origins of Godzilla. He was created because of radiation, and he's very, very powerful. And Godzilla has faced off against loads of monsters, and has ever only been defeated a few times. There was Mothra, there was King Kong, there was Destroyer, and he was defeated by humans. Basically what I'm saying is, we know that Godzilla is almost invincible. Even though he's been beaten a few times, he has faced off against some really strange and powerful monsters. Even a space version of himself, which was pretty cool. When it comes to the old movies, we wanted Godzilla to beat all these monsters, and we wanted to see how he would fare against them. And yeah, Godzilla has gone through so many things, like going into space, teaming up with people, facing off against robot versions of himself, clones of himself, and so on and so on. And that's all Godzilla was. Godzilla was sort of a reactionary monster, but he was still the main character of all these movies. And the interesting part of the movies was always the monsters that Godzilla was going to face off against. Mechas, clones, ancient monsters, and so on and so on, and fighting in different places too. And Godzilla doesn't have that much of a backstory other than he was created by a radioactive bomb, and that's it. I mean, come on, two monsters fighting each other. That would get any little kid excited, and that's all that Godzilla is. He's the monster that we root for, and we want to see him beat all these other monsters, because hey, he's the king of the monsters. But in my opinion, I don't think that's going to be enough when it comes to the monsterverse. Like, in the original movies, all he does is just defeat other monsters, and that's it. Now, I know some people are going to say, oh, but Freaky, there's a lot more to Godzilla in the original movies than just him fighting other monsters. Yes, I know that. Facing off against different monsters, facing off against a famous monster, facing off against a monster that actually killed him, going into space, and how he handles everything, etc, etc. But the thing is, that's not enough for the monsterverse. I mean, sure, don't get me wrong, when it comes to the monsterverse, there was the history with Godzilla and the Mutos, and there was the history with Mothra and Godzilla, and with King Ghidorah. And also, not to mention, in Godzilla vs. Kong, both the Kongs and Godzillas have a history together, and we also got to see Mechagodzilla, and the reason why they created him was so they could control all the monsters. So that makes sense. In my opinion, I think the monsterverse fleshes out Godzilla a little bit more at the moment. Again, the Mutos, the symbiotic relationship between the Mothras and the Godzillas, and how King Ghidorah is Godzilla's mortal enemy, and how King Ghidorah came from space, and the history with the Godzillas and the Kongs, and the whole thing with Mechagodzilla. And also not to mention that the Atlanteans also has a history with Godzilla, because Godzilla went to Atlantica so he could recover. So when it comes to the monsterverse versus the old Godzilla films, the monsterverse is at the very least giving us some background to Godzilla, giving us history and what Godzilla's role is in the monsterverse. But again, in Godzilla vs. Kong and Godzilla x Kong, you barely see Godzilla. But when it comes to Kong, he's given more screen time, more history, and we always thought Kong would just be okay. And you want him to find other Kongs that's just like him. Kong has a lot more going for him than Godzilla. In fact, we're shown more of Kong's legacy than Godzilla's legacy. So we need to change this. Godzilla needs to be given more stuff for him in the movies, instead of being seen in the movies sometimes for a short time, and Kong is in the front seat. So what could they do to give more screen time to Godzilla? Well, I do have a few ideas, so I'll just list them out right here. Okay, the first thing they should do in the monsterverse is to bring in other rivals like Kong, other monsters that he gets along with like Mothra, and other enemies like King Ghidorah. Yeah, I know, it's not very imaginative, but when it came to the 2014 movie, the Godzillas had an arch enemy, and that was the Mutos. Okay, technically they're not arch enemies, but the Mutos would lay their eggs in titans that are radioactive, not before killing them of course, and the Mutos have killed many Godzillas in the past. Anyways, you either have the rivals, the enemies, and monsters that get along with each other. These are one of the three things that fleshes out Godzilla, because these three things give a history to the Godzilla's past. These three things will give more depth to Godzilla. We'll know more about Godzilla and his kind, and how they would work in the food chain. Like, we know the Kongs and the Godzillas was fighting each other for a long time, so really, it's a combination of Kong's history and Godzilla's history. And you know what? This is a good thing, because not only is another monster on screen with Godzilla, but these two monsters share a past. The past tells us of what their relationship is, like with the Kongs and the Godzillas, or the Mothras and the Godzillas, or Ghidorah and the Godzillas. You guys get, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, when it comes to Godzilla's next rival, I definitely say that it should be Gamera. Simply because Gamera was created by the Atlanteans, and we also saw that Godzilla was also in an Atlantean temple. And you know what? I'm all for that. Think about it. We're only giving glimpses as to how and why Godzilla is in the Atlantean temple, but we don't know the full story as to why he was in that temple. I mean, yeah, he was there to like heal himself and charge up, but we don't know the full story. Like, was that temple made for other Godzillas, or was it made for specifically for this one Godzilla, or was it something else? That's something they could investigate. And not just that, I've been saying this for a long time, but I really wish that Gamera would be in the monsterverse. Like, I want him to be in the monsterverse like he was in these other movies, where he was created by the Atlanteans to combat the Gauss, and Gamera is underwater somewhere in another Atlantean temple. I mean, this is what they could do. Like, that temple that was destroyed, we can assume that was Godzilla's original home, right? And it was said that the Atlanteans created that temple, right? But what if this temple was just one of many temples that the Atlanteans created? You know, one for Godzilla and one for ding ding ding, you're right, Gamera. Like, what if, for example, that the Atlanteans created a temple just for Godzilla because he helped them fight off against the Gauss alongside Gamera. So Gamera had a temple for himself and Godzilla had a temple for himself. Or who knows, maybe there are like other temples out there that has other monsters in them. Like, these were homes for the monsters to heal and get rest, and it was to honor the monsters that helped them. And Gamera comes into the monsterverse to fight the Gyaos because the Gyaos has returned, and one of them evolved into Iris. And so, there you go. Gamera and Godzilla will have a connection and a shared history, and they wouldn't be fighting each other either. And yeah, I know for a fact there's going to be loads of people out there who says, oh, we want to see Godzilla and Gamera fight, and see who would win in a fight. But if you guys know the history between Godzilla and Gamera, like with the studios that created them, yeah, these two studios that created Godzilla and Gamera, they really don't get along. But in my opinion, I think a team up and helping each other would be the better option if it was to come down to Godzilla and Gamera. Again, if you guys know the history between these two companies, one company wants to see the other one smash the other one and win against their rivals monster. So I think, in my opinion, there should be a team up instead of a verse fight between Gamera and Godzilla. And for the third act, Kong can come in and fight alongside Godzilla, Gamera and Godzilla. So the big three are on the big screen fighting against the Gyaos. That will make everybody happy. So you'll get an explanation for the Atlantean temple and a history between Gamera and Godzilla. I mean, hey, they could fight, but I think that fight should be left in a stalemate so they can concentrate on the Gyaos. So Godzilla's got himself another rival with a history. Let's talk about monsters that he could get along with. Now, when it comes to Godzilla getting along with other monsters, Godzilla had a symbiotic relationship with Mothra. I'm not really sure about the relationship. Maybe it was like millions and millions of years ago and there was like loads of Mothras and they had a symbiotic relationship with other Godzillas. I'm not really sure, but that is also something they could look into, the relationship between the Mothras and the Godzillas. And then they find out about Batra, which is the opposite to Mothra. Like, they could do a history between Godzilla, Mothra and the Batras. Like, yeah, we know that Mothra and Godzilla has a symbiotic relationship, but they could also extend that with the introduction of Batra or Batras, like the Batras, like the Mutos, wants to take all the nuclear energy or radioactive energy from the Godzillas, and this is also dangerous towards Godzilla. But Mothra can also counteract Batra because Mothra protects Godzilla from Batra. So yeah, there you go. That's one idea. But what about other monsters that gets along with the Godzillas? Well, there's the Anguruses or Anguirus. Like, in the original films, he was the first monster to ever fight Godzilla, but in later films, he became Godzilla's friend, well, of sorts. So in my opinion, I think Anguirus could be one of those monsters that has a sort of understanding with each other. They're like, hey, oh, hey, or they come to each other's aid, or they help each other, you know, something like that. Or maybe Anguirus could be a monster that grew up alongside Godzilla, like a sort of friend. So basically they just get along, and you could have the same thing with the Titanosauruses. You know, from the movie The Terror of Mechagodzilla. Titanosaurus was a very peaceful monster until he was mind-controlled by aliens or something. So he could be one of the monsters that gets along okay with Godzilla, alongside Anguirus. Like, all these three monsters, Godzilla, Anguirus and Titanosaurus, could give us more depth to Godzilla and how he works. Like, why do they get along? And stuff like that. I can't really think of any other monster at the top of my head that has a history or could get along with Godzilla. Or, what about Zilla? You know, from Godzilla the animated series. I mean, yeah, think of what you want with the movie, but the series was really, really good. But in my opinion, I think both Godzilla and Zilla should team up. And in a way, Godzilla gets along with Zilla because to Godzilla, Godzilla feels that Zilla is one of his own kind, but not really. Like, oh, what if these Zillas are a cousin to the Godzillas, but the Zillas was much more weaker than the Godzillas? They could write Zilla like that Zilla was a branch off from the Godzillas. I've always wanted to see Zilla and Godzilla on the screen together. So there you go. Those are some really good ideas. And I'm not really sure about other monsters, but these are the monsters that could have a really good history with Godzilla. And let's move on to the third one, the arch nemesis. Now, when it comes to Godzilla, Godzilla has had a lot of enemies, but his primal enemy has always been King Ghidorah. But the thing is, he's dead, and Mechagodzilla has been destroyed. And it was said that King Ghidorah's consciousness was in Mechagodzilla. I mean, for all we know, he still might be in Mechagodzilla, even though he's shut down. But what about other arch nemesis? I mean, sure, don't get me wrong, they could bring back Mechagodzilla for a second round without any other interferences. It would just be Mechagodzilla versus Godzilla with the consciousness of King Ghidorah. So in a way, King Ghidorah does come back, but in the form of Mechagodzilla. But that's only if the humans want to rebuild Mechagodzilla. So those are two arch nemesis, King Ghidorah and Mechagodzilla. I mean, technically, when it comes to King Ghidorah, he's a monster that came from space and has a history with the Godzillas. And Mechagodzilla was made by humans, so he could destroy Godzilla. So those are two factions. One, natural monsters, and two, artificial monsters. So it can go one way or the other. A natural monster or a created monster. And from what I can understand, I think Godzilla has more created enemies than he does have natural enemies. think about. Yeah, sure, he has his rivals and he has his arch nemesis, but I think the majority of them is created. Biollante, Space Godzilla, Mecha Godzilla, Orga, Gigan, Edora, etc. And of course, Destroyer! I think the majority of Godzilla monsters were created. I think it could be like maybe 30% was natural and the other 70% was created. And I'm not gonna lie, I wish we could have more natural monsters. You know, monsters that weren't created to go up against Godzilla. And listen, don't get me wrong, I like the idea that humans or some sort of accident created a monster and Godzilla is facing off against this created monster. I mean, come on, Space Godzilla, Destroyer, Mecha Godzilla, Biollante, and a fan favourite idea, Kongzilla. That's the combination of Godzilla and Kong. Because when it comes to created monsters, they don't really have a in-depth history with Godzilla, but just the fact that something that revolved around Godzilla created this monster, and Godzilla has to beat this monster. I mean, don't get me wrong, Mecha Godzilla, awesome. Biollante, awesome. Space Godzilla, awesome. Orga, awesome. Destroyer, awesome. Either by accident, or aliens created it, or humans created it. I do like the idea, and here's my top 3. Biollante, Space Godzilla, and Destroyer. I mean, come on, Destroyer has to be in the monsterverse. He just has to be. I mean, he was created because of the Oxygen Destroyer, and it's crystal clear that he should be one of the last monsters to fight Godzilla. And when it comes to created monsters should have that status of, okay, so what is Godzilla going to do against this guy? How is he going to win against this monster? I mean, sure, don't get me wrong, when it comes to natural monsters, you can also do that too. But when it comes to created monsters, they are basically upgrades, and was made to be more powerful than Godzilla, supposedly. So, natural monsters, they should have a history with Godzilla. And created monsters, either through Godzilla's DNA, or it revolves around Godzilla somehow, or other titans. Like, if a mad scientist got his hands on every single titan's DNA, and they decided to clone the monsters into one monster, like it can fly like Rodan, and it's got the strength of Kong, and the atomic breath of Godzilla. You know, that sort of stuff. I mean, that's all well and good and all, but when it comes to the old Godzilla films, I think half of them make Godzilla more humanized and less animal-like. I mean, when it comes to Kong, you can understand why he's the more civilized monster that gets along with humans, because Kong is more relatable to humans. He can talk to them. But when it comes to Godzilla, even though he's intelligent, Godzilla is more of an animal than anything, and is a force of nature within the monsterverse, and that's the way they need to keep him. They need to make him more of an animal without any human characteristics. Yeah, I know, the old Godzilla films did that, but this is the monsterverse. They need to show Godzilla what he would do in his natural environment. Like, how would he react to other monsters? Like, how does he eat? What does he eat? What would he do if he became a father? And also, speaking of which, in the old Godzilla films, Godzilla did have an adopted son, and that's what I think they should do when it comes to the monsterverse. I think Godzilla should be given a son that he can adopt, and the movie should also show us on how he would look after the baby Godzilla. He had a son in the older movies, and he had a nephew in the old Godzilla cartoons. So I say, give Godzilla an adopted son, and show us what he does during his everyday life. Yeah, sure, it's cool to see the king of the monsters fighting other monsters, but I think a slice of life and showing us what he does with his everyday life and showing us how good of a parent he would be good. His reaction to other monsters, how he get out of a predicament, his everyday life and history with other monsters or other civilizations. Or maybe they could bring in Gigan. Okay, hear me out. When it comes to Gigan, he was created by aliens, and every time Gigan fails or he's destroyed, the aliens would upgrade him, so he would be more suited to his next fight. And the aliens would do this every single time. So what if, years ago, the original Gigan was facing off against Godzilla, and Godzilla destroyed Gigan, and the aliens was like, we will be back. So they retreat, rebuild Gigan to be much more better, and the humans learn more about the aliens, Gigan, and Godzilla, and how they have a past with him. So not only will Godzilla have a history with other monsters on Earth, but he'll also have a history with other monsters from outer space. That'd be neat. And if they wanted to, they could bring in more of King Ghidorah's kind. Like in the Mothra series, we are told that there's another monster that's like King Ghidorah, and he's supposed to be like related to him or something. So why not bring another Ghidorah from whatever planet they're from? And this Ghidorah could be much more powerful than the last one, and it wants revenge on Godzilla for what it did to Ghidorah. And this new Ghidorah could be King Ghidorah. Again, hey, they have a history, and this new Ghidorah is much more powerful than the last, but it would be a different King Ghidorah. That could be something. The thing is, it's very hard to write Godzilla, because when it comes to a human's perspective, they can't write Godzilla being too human, but with Kong they can. Because when it comes to Kong, he has had a few movies, but not as many as Godzilla has, and he clearly doesn't have as many enemies that Godzilla has. But when it comes to Kong, he is easily written. Kong is a social animal. He longs for his family, he longs for his own kind. He interacts with humans, he's good around them. They can put human characteristics on Kong because he's relatable to humans. Yeah, sure, Kong's an animal, but he's also human-like too. So Kong's a mixture between animal and human. It's okay to show Kong with human characteristics, but Godzilla shouldn't be allowed to have human characteristics because Godzilla is a lizard. And listen, I'm not saying that we should make Godzilla stupid. We know he's smart, but Godzilla needs to be portrayed as a monster and an animal first and foremost, like with animals do in the world, in the food chain. So it can be difficult when it comes to writing Godzilla. Again, with the old Godzilla films, they were having fun with him, and Godzilla was more goofy. Okay, I'm not saying like every single Godzilla movie had him goofy, but you could clearly see that he did have human characteristics. Like, remember that dance he did when he was on the moon? Remember that drop kick he did? The creators knew they were having fun, and this was all silly. And when it came to the 1998 Godzilla movie, they ruined it when it came to Godzilla, but in turn, they actually created Zilla. And when it comes to the monsterverse now, they have a chance of making Godzilla looking good than he ever has been. And I want them to succeed of making the monsterverse Godzilla one of the best Godzillas ever. And for that to happen, they can't just have him go around being a secondary character that comes in later on, or he's a background character and he's here to save the day at the last minute. They need to do more with monsterverse Godzilla. Show us what he would do if he did have a son. Show us his everyday life. Show us what he would do all by himself against other monsters. Show us history that Godzilla has with other monsters. Show us what he would do if he was facing off against a created monster. Show us what he would do if he was in a team up. And I'm not talking about Kong, but I'm talking about other monsters too. Show us relationships between monsters with Godzilla. Show us what he does when it comes to Godzilla keeping the other monsters in line. Show us interactions with other monsters that he gets along with, like with Mothra. Like, what do those two do when they're not fighting other monsters? Godzilla cannot just be seen just fighting other monsters. And when I say fighting other monsters, I'm talking about we can't just see him just fighting. They need to show more character in Godzilla, but at the same time keep it more animalistic. And yes, before anybody says anything, yes, the monsterverse isn't always about Godzilla, I understand that. In fact, I've always wanted to see other monsters come into the monsterverse from other series of movies, like Mechanicon, the Giant Claw, Gargo, Zilla, Gamera, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, come on, having a crossover between Kong, Gamera and Godzilla would be a freaking dream come true for monster fans. And you know what, I don't mind them if they want to concentrate on other monsters, like, oh, leave Godzilla out of a few movies and concentrate either on Kong or Gamera or Zilla or any other famous monster. If they want to bring in other monsters from other series of movies into the monsterverse and they just want to make movies of those monsters and then a few movies later they can bring back Godzilla. The monsterverse shouldn't be solely dependent on Godzilla and Kong because again, it's called the monsterverse. We've had Kong, we've had Godzilla, so I say they should bring in other monsters. Again, like Gamera or Zilla or the Cloverfield monster, Gargo or the giant troll. There are plenty of other monsters they can bring in the monsterverse, and I'm talking about monsters that we want to root for. Like, I'd root for Gamera, I'd root for Zilla, Gargo, and other monsters. There needs to be more to the monsterverse than just Kong and Godzilla. There needs to be other monsters, and Gamera is definitely one of them. I mean, look at other verses. There's the MCU universe, there's the DC universe, we had Batman, the Flash, the Green Lantern, Superman, Wonder Woman, and so on and so on and so on. There was the Marvel heroes, Spider-Man, Thor, Iron Man, the Hulk, Black Panther, and so on and so on and so on. There are loads of heroes, and they all started off in their own comics until they crossed over with each other, and in DC we had the Justice League, and in Marvel we had the Avengers, and it's the same with the monsterverse. It shouldn't boil down to just Godzilla and Kong. There needs to be other main protagonist monsters for us to follow, like Kong's from America, Godzilla is from Japan, Gorgo is from Britain, there's Typhon from Greek mythology, there's the World Serpent from Norse mythology. There are plenty of giant monsters from movies or from mythology that comes from different countries that could be introduced into the monsterverse, and they could be their own main characters in the monsterverse, and there's plenty to choose from. And listen, I'm not suggesting something like, oh, the Titans can have their own Justice League or their own Avengers. All I'm saying is there needs to be other main protagonist giant monsters for us to follow. Again, Gamera could be one, Zilla could be one, Gorgo, Viren, the Loch Ness Monster, the Giant Troll, and so on and so on. And yeah, now I've gone off track. And also, all these monsters need to be carefully written too. Godzilla needs to be well written. Godzilla needs to be given more respect and more screen time, and other monsters need to be introduced too. I mean, come on, it's called the Monsterverse, not the freaking Kong and Godzilla planet. What do you guys think? Should they introduce more monsters in the monsterverse? If you ask me, I think so. So, what do you guys think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Do you think they've given Godzilla more respect, or do you think they've given Godzilla less respect? Would you guys like to see more monsters from other series and movies in the monsterverse? Please let me know in the comments below, and let's get a discussion going. I'm Freaky. Peace out. And please don't forget to check out my other social medias. Please go and check out my alternative video platforms: Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Twitch, and please come and hang out on my Discord server. We can play games, have a movie night or a series night, or you can watch me play a few games. And if you guys have any suggestions of any videos you want me to react to, or any video ideas in general, you can tell me on my Discord. I'm also on Twitter, Gab, Getter, and Paula. I'm on Locals, Tumblr, Minds, and if you guys want to support me, please go and check out my Subscribe Star. It's like Patreon, but better. All these things are in the description box below, so please go and check them out and subscribe to them. I'm Geek Freak. Peace out.